So today we're going to talk about kettlebell swings, and this is going to be our main introduction to kettlebell swings video. Obviously we'll have lots of other ones around, but this is sort of the one if you're a new coach and it's your first time teaching kettlebell swings to your group. This will be the one that you can kind of reference because hopefully it will go into enough detail and kind of explore a lot of the common faults and cues and issues with teaching the kettlebell from scratch. So before you even get into kettlebells, we're going to talk about clearing up some misunderstandings on kettlebells. We're going to talk about precursors that you want to ensure your clients have before they attempt a kettlebell swing. We're going to talk about what kind of warm-up or assessment you should put in before you introduce the kettlebells to the class. We're going to talk about the quick, easy way to teach the kettlebell swing, assuming everything works. And then we'll go into some more detail if for whatever reason the clients aren't getting them, or you're finding some people who have certain issues executing the swing and what you can do to address the common issues. Okay, one of the things we should clarify when we talk about kettlebell swings is you should ensure that you know which kettlebell swing you're trying to teach. The reason I'm saying this is because when you go online and you do a search for kettlebell swing, there could be lots of different styles of kettlebell swings that might be appropriate for different goals. So for example, if you see a CrossFit video, they might start teaching what's called the American style kettlebell swing, which I would say has a little bit more knee in it. Okay, it's more of a vertical movement, and when they do the swing, it ends up overhead, so your kettlebell is overhead. There's specific reasons why CrossFitters might use the style swing, both historically and in terms of competition, but if you're not doing CrossFit, that is probably not the most appropriate swing for your population for a number of reasons. The number one reason just being that the reason we do the swing is to really teach a nice efficient hinge, to teach cycling energy, loading up the hamstrings, to work on core stability. And the American swing might have some benefits in certain contexts, but it is not the most efficient way for us to do that, and it introduces extra variables that aren't necessary. There are other style of swings that might come up. We are not teaching a sport style swing. We're not really interested in that. A shorthand for what we teach, I would say, is if you do a search for a Russian swing or maybe a hard style swing, those will be the two variations that are probably most in line with what it is that we're trying to teach. We're going for a nice simple version of the swing that allows people to load up their hamstrings and their posterior chain and allows them to improve their efficiency in cycling elastic energy. So that's what we're going for, and that's what we're going to focus on. Another point I want to bring up is the swing is a relatively advanced movement in that you wouldn't just give it to someone you've never worked with before. People could have all kinds of contraindications that might make the swing a bad choice for them, at least on that particular day. So you kind of want to make sure that they have the kinesthetic awareness, that they have the core control and stability. They could have mobility issues. There could be a whole bunch of reasons why the swing might not be appropriate, especially when you're working with somebody brand new. So you want to make sure that you've worked with the client enough just to ensure that they have at least two precursors. One of them, which is ensuring that they have some idea of how to do a hinge. You could teach them on the day of, but don't assume that people have the hinge as soon as you give them the kettlebell. It'd be worth doing some kind of warm-up or assessment beforehand. You also want to ensure that people can maintain a neutral spine, and they know what that feels like, and they understand what it means to go into lumbar flexion. They know what it means to go into lumbar extension, and then they can fight the tendency of their body to either go into extreme extension at the top or to come down and go into flexion at the bottom of the swing. So you want to ensure that you spend some time with new clients on that, which is why I'd say normally swings should not be the very first movement you do with somebody. They're a great movement, and you could definitely teach somebody how to swing in one day, but it shouldn't be the first thing you do. You should do a few things beforehand. So really quickly about the hinge, you just want to see what kind of awareness people have. So when we're talking about the hinge, I would ensure that you have a dowel on you and just get people used to the idea of hinging from their hips while keeping their back neutral, and get them to see what it feels like, especially if they go too low, how their lumbar spine can start curving and it'll peel away here. But you can also use the hinge if you have it just at the bottom here, so people know what it feels like not to overextend. And there's a drill we do later once people learn their swings where you can have a partner hold a stick behind somebody, and then if they go into overextension, they'll hit the back of their head. You don't need to do that on the first day, but we spend so much time working on hip extension and showing people how to move explosively with the swing. The first overcorrection a lot of people make is going into lumbar hyperextension and really ending up with the hips far forward here instead of standing tall, nice and stacked in a plank position with the neutral spine. So as is true of a lot of coaching, the moment you teach people how to do something, they'll often exaggerate it once they get it. So you have to teach people how to do something, and then you have to go ahead and calibrate it back in to ensure that you're actually getting the final position that you want. So if you know that people have some form of a hinge, next thing you want to do is you want to test to see what their hinge looks like under tension. And without the dowel. There's lots of ways to do it. A classic way to do it is, I believe Dan John came up with this one, is some variation of a goat belly hinge or a goat hinge. So you get the kettlebell, you kind of push it down roughly where your ribs meet your belly, and then you just practice your hinge motion here. So you're doing some hinges. While your clients are doing this, draw their attention to their hamstrings and where they feel their tension. If you find that clients, when they do this, they tend to collapse forward, you can also do more of a good morning style goat hinge, where I have it on the back here. And if I keep it on my back here, it's automatically going to keep my shoulders back and my chest up. So you can practice this if you find that a client has a tendency to hunch forward when they do the goat belly. And you just want to see, can they maintain a hinge? You can have them do a little bit faster if you want. See how they feel at that range of motion. So regarding the hinge, those would be the two movements I would check first. So the first time you do your kettlebell swings, I would spend some time working on the dowel hinges, then I would progress to the goat hinges. And if everybody looks good with that, and then you know they have the hinge. The other thing to consider is neutral spine. Depending on the weather outside, you might not want to have people lying on the back. But generally, when I teach neutral spine, I'm going to have people lie on the ground like this. You want to check to see what their gap looks like in their lumbar spine, and more importantly, do they have control? So I like to have people try to exaggerate the gap by flaring their ribs out to see what extension feels like, and then I have them try to do the opposite, bring their ribs in, press their lumbar spine against the ground, contract their abs, and see if they can make that go away. Once you know that they can do it from a lying position, you can test it in other positions like a quadruped position. So you can have them sort of do global cat camels, cat cows, and have them first maybe try to exaggerate lumbar extension. So they're flaring out their ribs, they're pushing their chest out, their back is going to go concave. See if they can have them do the opposite. Maybe pull their shoulder blades apart around their lumbar spine, make a sort of a nice arch in their back, and then see if they can find neutral. The big thing is to get clients thinking about what their back is doing. If you have someone who hasn't moved in a while, they might not understand that their hip joint is separate from their lumbar spine joint. So you just want to make sure that they can control the different joints. And if you have them get into different positions and get out of those positions, and if you link those positions to specific cues, when they're in a high stress situation, when they're doing their conditioning, they'll already have those cues, and those cues will be meaningful for them. So you're not just trying to cue somebody on the fly when they've never heard any of these positions before. So the last thing I would talk about is letting clients know that the top of the kettlebell swing should look like the top of the plank. So a classic way to start this is you ask everybody, guys, does this look like a good plank? No. Why not? Well, because you're overarching your back, your hips are low. How would you correct it? Bring your hips up a little bit, maybe tighten your abs, engage your core in this position. So you can say, just as that wasn't a good plank, okay, this is not what we want the top of the kettlebell swing to look like. When we do the kettlebell swing, we want our joints to be stacked, so you want your spine to be neutral within that S curve. You want your abs to be tight, and if your hands are out in front of you, you should just be able to see the kettlebell, but this should look like the top of a plank position. So you can do the same thing. You can have them exaggerate it, and you can say, abs tight. Exaggerate it, abs tight. So that's another way to correct it. The last thing I think is useful is doing some variation of pulse planks or hard style planks. And this is just when people hold a plank position. You could do this from the elbow or from the palms, When people hold a plank position, they tend to be very passive here. So you can just kind of hold this the whole time. I'm not really doing much other than I'm just stopping myself from sagging. But what you can try to do is you can try to get people to really engage their abs for a few seconds and then relax. Engage their abs for a few seconds and then relax. And the cue here is on the ground, while your elbows and forearms are on the ground, think about driving your elbows down like you're doing a crunch. So imagine you're doing a crunch and you're driving your elbows towards your knees and holding it. And that way you can kind of teach them the pulse so they understand when their body's under stress and their lumbar spine wants to go into hyperextension, they can engage those anti-extension muscles. So instead of ending up here, they can quickly contract their abs and end up in a neutral position. So before you even get to the kettlebell swings, just ensure your clients have their hinges, ensure they have their core control, and ensure you know what kind of swing you're trying to teach. So when you go online and look at different videos, you don't get confused because you look at 3 different videos and you see 3 different kinds of swings. So be clear about what you're trying to teach and make sure you communicate that to your clients. Okay, I mentioned that when you're first introducing swings, what you can do is you can work some very basic assessments into the warm-up, which will do a few things. They allow you to see how your clients move. So right away you can see if any clients have issues with specific patterns or movements or positions or any kind of weaknesses or imbalances, or just if they find something confusing, you can start getting a sense of how the client moves and how they process instructions and cues, etc. And then if you do a good warm-up, you can also actually activate those muscles, get those muscles working, hopefully help prevent injuries. You know, I know that there's certain movements, if I don't warm up in a specific way, I'm much more likely to tweak something. So for example, if I'm squatting, I'm gonna really warm up my adductors for a long time so I don't tweak my left adductor. Similarly, if I'm gonna be doing some heavy squats, especially anteriorly loaded squats, sometimes I can tweak my back right here. So I'll work on my diaphragmatic breathing a bit. I'll continue to work on my adductors to make sure they're going. And then I'll just make sure that I warm up my hips and I work on some stability exercises ahead of time, just so I get my brain ready and my body ready before I start moving. So there's lots of different warm-ups that you can do before you get into kettlebell swings, but for an early class, here's a few that I would recommend. Number 1, body weight RDLs. So have your class stand, feet athletic position, so feet roughly hip width apart. Get your hands, put them on your thighs, shoulders back, big chest. Push your bum back and let your hands slide down until they get to about this position. If it's a really new class, have them move their knees back and forth, okay? Have them pull their shins and their knees all the way back. So you notice there's still a slight bend in my knees here, but I've pulled everything back as much as I can, and they'll feel this hamstring tension here. When they feel that, let them know. It's like, look, we want the tension in your hamstrings because that means that the tension is not going to be on your spine as much. Rather than going into flexion and losing all that tension, keeping everything stiff so you can feel that tension in your hamstrings. Similarly, if you bring your knees forward here, you're going to lose that tension as well. We want people to get used to the idea of keeping tension in their hamstrings and not shying away from it. So you want people to really learn to embrace the tension in their hamstrings so that when they're swinging back in the kettlebell swing, they feel that tension, and that should be a safe feeling for them. They should know that if they have that tension in their hamstrings, they're doing everything correctly, and they're going to use that elastic energy to launch the kettlebell with more power while at the same time protecting their back. So I'd have them do a few bodyweight RDLs and play around with the tension here. You're also checking to see if they have hip control, if they can go into flexion and back into extension or neutral hips. Next thing I would do is I would work on some rooster walks. Rooster walks are just another simple way to see what kind of control people have. It's going to give a nice stretch in their posterior chain. It's also going to see, can my clients keep their chest up and their shoulders back while they're moving? And do they know how to push their hips back, or are they rounding their back? It's also an opportunity to start getting some cues going. So if you see somebody who's hunching over like that, see if you can correct them, shoulders back, big chest, strong core, and get them to start thinking about what their lumbar spine is doing versus what their hips are doing. Other warm-ups that are a bit more specialized, but I might run for the first few weeks in a new group. I'm going to call these no-knee hinge swing jumps. You can call them whatever you want. But before you get a kettlebell in people's hands, you can just practice having them get into their hinges and then practice swinging back and then coming forward, just like that, just a little movement. And all you want them to do is you want them to see, can they move horizontally without using their knees? So I'd say, okay, everybody, get in your athletic position, feet hip width apart. Now what I want you to do is I want you to actively swing your whole body back into a hinge position. And when you feel that tension in your hamstrings, I want you to squeeze your bum, open up your hips, and I want you to shift forward without using your knees to jump. I just want you to go like that. Looks a bit silly, but it teaches timing. It teaches them to really load up those hamstrings, and it gets them to start thinking about power production from that hinge position. So that's another nice one. Other ones that are quite good, if you're trying to assess how a client moves, I like to put some inchworms in. Inchworms as well will start to give me an idea of what their hamstring flexibility looks like, hip mobility, core strength, etc. I would just keep them simple today. So I would go ahead, push your bum back, fingertips touch the ground, walk out as far as you feel comfortable, you know, wherever that is for the client. Walk back up, try to keep your legs straight, and then stand back up again. And again, it's just giving me some more opportunity to check their hinge position, to check their lumbar spine control, to check their core control. And it's also giving the client practice in all these movements. So when you get them over to start teaching them the kettlebell swings and the hinges, they'll be ready to learn. Okay, so I'm going to talk about best case scenario with the kettlebell swing. You've gone over your hinges, you've gone over your core control, you've done a warm-up, you're introducing the kettlebell swing, and you feel like everybody's moving well. You don't see any clients that you think are going to have any specific restrictions. You don't know of anyone that has any specific injuries after you've asked them and you've checked their forms and their Part Q and everything, so you feel good to go. So you're like, all right, I'm going to just teach this quick and dirty, try to get it out of the way, see how it goes. So here's the kettlebell, all right? Nice way to do it is to start with the kettlebell slightly far away. So when you pick it up, naturally the gravity of the kettlebell is just going to load up those hamstrings. So what I would say is I'm going to start back here. I'm going to pick up the kettlebell, and as the kettlebell swings back and I feel that tension in my hamstrings and my wrist touches my thigh, as soon as my wrist touches my thigh, I'm going to squeeze my bum, explode. I'm going to get that kettlebell up to go a little bit higher. Now, normally we teach kettlebell to eye level, but what might work better for the first time is have them start low and maybe have them just gradually go higher and higher and higher. So maybe say something like, I don't know, waist, belly button, ribs, nipples, eyeball, something like that. Don't have them overthink it. Just say, I want you to start with a nice little one, hike it back, go a little bit higher, a little bit higher, a little bit higher, and build up confidence, all while keeping your abs tight, not going into hyperextension. So maybe something like this, pull back, just like that, a little bit higher, a little bit higher. Okay, and then if they feel confident, just have them do a few here, just like that. And if that's what their swing looks like and you have everybody swinging like that, you can be very happy, all right? That's best case scenario. And a lot of times they'll teach a class and a lot of people will get it. So maybe 80% of the people will get it, 20% won't. That's great. For the people that aren't getting it, you want to quickly do some visual triage, and you just want to think, okay, if they're not doing it, are they doing anything really weird with their back? Are they like hunching over their back like this? Or are they just maybe not using their hips enough, or not getting high enough, or not generating enough power? Just quickly want to see, is this something potentially dangerous? Has the whole thing fallen apart? Or are they just small things that we need to refine? Either way, you can start going over points of performance. So you don't want to load people up with too much at the beginning, but then if you find that you need to sort of refine things, maybe over the next few workouts, you can start picking some of the issues, again, if they're not dangerous, and figure out how to refine them. But things that I would talk to clients as I was explaining the kettlebell swing to them, I'd say on the kettlebell swing, you want your knees to be soft, so you don't need to keep them stiff. You're not keeping your legs straight the whole time. You have a little bit of bend in them, but 90% of the kettlebell swing is going to be hinging back and forth. If my knees bend a little bit, that's incidental to the movement I'm doing. I'm not trying to generate power with my quads. Remember, quads are normally going to be used for generating vertical power, whereas hamstrings are going to be mostly associated with producing horizontal power. So you want to ensure that people understand the power is coming from their hamstrings, back like that, not some kind of movement here where they're squatting and trying to bring it overhead like that. Usually a lot of people will get that. Again, some people won't, and there's some drills for that. The other thing that I would say when I'm first teaching it is really emphasize that the wrists make contact with the thighs, and then when you feel that pull on your hamstrings, then you explode and generate that power. So you want to make sure people are confident that those wrists kind of touch, or their forearms touch the thigh, so they feel that stretch in their hamstrings before they explode. You can talk about the idea of pulling back on a slingshot, pulling back on a rubber band. You want to ensure that your shoulders are back, so you want to retract your shoulder blades a bit. Maybe not, you don't need to exaggerate it, but you just want to ensure there's some nice tension in there to stop them from hunching forward. And similarly, you want to make sure that the chest remains high. What I mean is I've got my zipper up here. If I were looking in the mirror, or if I were peer coaching somebody else, I would want to make sure that their zipper is visible, or if they have some kind of sports emblem on their chest, you know, some kind of brand symbol, you'd want to make sure that that was visible as well, as opposed to having them come down here. Usually it's if they're rounding their back, you'll lose any kind of sight on this. So if you keep the chest up high, that means it can be visible. So a lot of times big chest, high chest is actually going to cue a straight lumbar spine. We try to get our kettlebells to eyeball level with tight core and neutral spine. So again, when we do our kettlebell swings, want it to about eyeball level, and abs are tight at the top, as opposed to something that looks like that. We're not trying to get into this position. Okay, we want to get up to eyeball level when we do our swings. Other things I would talk about is ensure clients understand that they can actively pull the kettlebell back to that hinge position, especially as they're trying to add speed. You can let gravity do its work like this, but eventually you're going to actively hike it behind you to load up those hamstrings and also allow you to get more reps in if that is something that you're trying to do. So ensure clients understand the basic points of performance. And then common faults you're going to see are going to be squatty kettlebells, using their knees too much, low chest, hyperextension, fear of the hinge. And what I mean there is not letting the kettlebell get behind them, but just maybe stopping here, so not getting the full hinge, or sometimes doing arms only kettlebell swings, so just using their upper body to do that. So in a second, I'll go ahead and talk about different drills that you can do if you see any of those issues with your clients. Okay, one of the most common kettlebell faults that you'll see is either squatty kettlebell swing. So again, knees coming down here and turning it into a squat. It's actually quite hard to even do. There's a few issues with that. It's very tiring, and instead of making a nice tight pendulum swing, your swing will be much looser, and there's going to be a lot of slack at the bottom. You're going to lose tension, and then you're going to go ahead and try to generate that power again with your quads. It's just a really inefficient movement. It's also just a misuse of the movement. It's not what we're trying to do. There's lots of really good movements for generating vertical power. You can do all kinds of thruster variations and jumping and wall balls and other kinds of plyometric stuff. That's not what we're going for today. What we're going for today is to get that hinge cycle. That's one issue with the squatty swing. Is that it's just inefficient. Number two, a lot of times when people have a squatty swing, they're also going to be much more likely to round their lower back, and they're just not keeping the tension that we want. So potentially they could hurt themselves. And then, you know, again, it's robbing you of that hinge pattern that we're going to use over and over and over again in so many other activities. We want to make sure that we use this as an opportunity to get people's hinges better. Which could be another issue with the squatty swing. A lot of times the squatty swing might be a fear of going into the hinge. So I'll talk about both of these at once. If you have someone who's having issues with this, just go ahead and make sure they understand the hinge first. You can even have them just pick up the kettlebell and just have them bring their bum back and come up. Bring their bum back and come up. This isn't perfect, but at least it's getting them to kind of create some power. Then what I would say is, okay, now let the kettlebell pull you back a little bit more and feel that tension in your hamstrings. If they just do this, they're 90% of the way there. They're not generating all the power I'd like to see, but it's fine. So if you can just kind of get them to feel the pendulum effect of the swing. That's really good. Sometimes some people might benefit from spending a little bit of time on the swing pickup put downs. So this is back to when we taught the swing at the beginning. Start with the kettlebell away from you. Get into a hinge position. You can have them use that RDL position. Find that. And then with this one, you just pick it up, swing back, stand, and put it back down again. And this, you're just using gravity and letting it do its thing. So this way, when you pick it up, the kettlebell swings back. You just let them allow the kettlebell to do that, it's going to start loading up the hamstrings. What we're trying to do is trying to build confidence with loading up those hamstrings. So I would take a few minutes to sort of refresh their hinge, refresh their confidence in getting their hamstrings loaded, and then either just try some nice and easy sort of pendulum hinges, or actively have them reset a few of those pickup swing backs and see if you can't build up their confidence that way. So that'll help people a lot. Another issue you might see is people either using their arms too much or just not using their glutes enough. So if you're working outside and you're not afraid of breaking anything, a nice way to teach some confidence in the swing and power production is to do some kettlebell swing launches, kettlebell swing throws, whatever you want to call them. And ensure that it's nice and safe, nobody's going to get hurt. Sometimes it's quite nice to have a group of people lined up in the same position facing there. And for this one, what you're going to do is you're going to have them swing on the count of 3. So you'll start 3, 2, 1, go. 1, 2, 3, let go. And you try to launch it as far as you can. So you go 1, 2, and 3. Okay. And if you have people do that a few times, they realize that's the power that they're trying to produce. Once they've done that a few times, it's a lot of fun if you're doing it outside. You know you're not going to break anything. And 2, it just shows people what you're trying to achieve. So I've found that you have people who have issues with either that arms-only swing like that or the sort of wobbly swing. Getting them to actually think about throwing it can fix a lot of that. If not, there's other drills you can do, but that's one that works in a group setting. That's really effective. And the last thing, I need to go find a kettlebell here. I'll grab this little 12. Is bent arm low swings. So if you have a client who is really focusing on getting up over here and they're hyperextending, like I said, usually this won't be a day one problem. This could be someone who's been doing kettlebell swings for a while and they start to overcompensate. But if you have someone who right away is having issues with it, you want to make sure you still load up the hamstrings, and you don't want the kettlebell to go too light because it's actually impossible to do a kettlebell swing correctly if the kettlebell is too light. If I were going to do this with a 6 or something, I just wouldn't be able to load up my hamstrings properly. I could pantomime it, but it'd be very hard for me to do a kettlebell swing properly. So if I had a heavy kettlebell, I could go ahead and have people start the kettlebell swing just with their elbows bent a little bit, still going for that wrist contact. And when they come up, I'm just going to go ahead and have them do it with their elbows bent rather than keeping their arms straight. And what that's going to do is it's going to reduce the moment arm of the kettlebell. It's going to make the, the oscillation of the pendulum, it's going to make it shorter as well. So it means when they're all the way up here, okay, instead of focusing on getting the kettlebell to this level and overarching their back to get there, they can just focus on loading their hamstrings up and generating that power. Then over time, you can gradually have them see what it feels like with longer arms. But the nice thing about the bent arm kettlebell swing is that it still allows you to load up your hamstrings with a moderately heavy kettlebell. It still allows you to hit that full extension, but it takes out the extra variables of trying to get the kettlebell all the way up here, which could be one of the reasons why people tend to overextend, okay? So I'll do a few more swings. In the final thing, I'll talk about it one more time. Then after that, you should be ready to teach a kettlebell swing. So once again, I'm going to do a kettlebell swing. My feet are going to be roughly about hip to shoulder width apart, not too wide, not too narrow, just wide enough so the kettlebell can pass through. I'm going to begin the movement by getting into a hinge position, that body weight RDL position right there. So I'm going to come down here, pick up the kettlebell, swing behind me, and now I'm just using the weight of the kettlebell. Every single time the kettlebell comes down, I'm gonna let it pull me into a hinge position at the bottom, feel that stretch in my hamstrings, and then pop it back up to eyeball level like that. Notice my chest stays up. I'm not rounding my lumbar spine. And at the top, every single time I come to the top, I'm actively engaging my abs and not trying to hyperextend. You should notice that at the top, my shoulders, hips, knees, ankles should be more or less lined up, as opposed to doing this, which is not what we want. Once you get the cycle on this, you could sort of do kettlebell swings indefinitely, which means it's probably time to go up in weight. So you find a weight that's challenging for you. Anyway, that's our kettlebell swing video. Enjoy.